The Pope is one of the most powerful people on earth as the head of the Catholic Church leading 1.4 billion people. One of the oldest traditions in history, the line of popes can be traced back to Jesus himself, when Christians were just a small, persecuted group in the Roman Empire. Later, Christianity was adopted by the Roman Empire, and it grew to where the Pope had authority over the most powerful monarchies and emperors in Europe, mobilizing its own armies as well as leagues of nations in many wars over centuries. Before Italy was a nation, the popes ruled over an independent country called the Papal States for 1,000 years with Rome as its capital. Many popes were killed, and some in very strange and brutal ways, and they came from all over Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and recently South America. To make this video, I read the profiles of every single pope to condense only the most interesting details in a concise way. This video will focus more on the geopolitics of how the papacy affected 2,000 years of world history, covering the rise and fall of empires, scandals, plagues, schisms, the Crusades, the Renaissance, slavery, colonization, and world wars. This is every pope recognized by the Catholic Church. Peter was one of Jesus' closest friends and one of the first and most prominent of his 12 disciples. According to tradition, Jesus gave him the keys to the kingdom of heaven and promised him a special place in this new church, famously telling him, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Though some debate the interpretation of this and argue Peter himself said he is just one of many elders of the church, the Catholic Church officially recognizes Peter as the first pope or bishop of Rome. It's believed the Roman Emperor Nero ordered his execution and that Peter requested to be crucified upside down as he didn't feel worthy to be crucified in the same way as Jesus. Linus was chosen by Peter as a bishop and became the next leader of the church after Peter's imprisonment. It's believed that Linus converted the daughter of a Roman official to Christianity and was then killed for this. Around this time, there were only a few thousand Christians in the world, mainly in Judea and the Roman Empire. Anacletus was also made a bishop by Peter and became the next head of the church after Linus. His exact dates are debated, and his even identity is confused often between two people, Cletus or Anacletus, but he's known for creating 25 parishes in Rome as well as several priests and then being killed by the Romans as well. Clement I was also appointed by Peter and wrote the first Christian document outside of the New Testament. He was imprisoned by the Roman Emperor Trajan and then executed by being tied to an anchor and thrown into the sea. Evaristus organized the new role of bishops within the church. Also during his papacy, the writer Saint Ignatius of Antioch is credited with the first use of the word Catholic, which comes from the Greek word katholikos, which means universal or complete to describe the church. Alexander I is credited for introducing holy water into Christian rituals and converting 1,500 people, including the man who jailed him. Sixtus I saw the Roman Empire reach its territorial height under emperors Trajan and Hadrian. Telesphorus is said to have introduced the traditions of midnight mass, celebrating Easter on Sundays, Lent, and the singing of Gloria. He was also martyred by the Romans. Hyginus is believed to have started the tradition of godparents who would assist in baptism. Pius I opposed the new Christian movement of Marcionism, which rejected the Old Testament for the way it depicted God as being vengeful. Anicetus started the fierce debate of which date to celebrate Easter that would continue throughout the church for many years. He also decreed that priests aren't allowed to have long hair and saw Marcus Aurelius become the Roman emperor. Soter was the first to declare that marriage is only valid if blessed by a priest and established Easter as an annual festival in Rome. Eleutherius was the first to declare that no foods are forbidden for Christians to eat, saying as long as they are edible and sensible, God created all foods to be eaten, which was a departure from the Jewish laws restricting what cannot be eaten. Victor I was the first African pope. He replaced Greek with Latin as the official language of the church. He led during the death of Emperor Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, which marked the end of the Roman Empire's golden age and gradual decline from here onwards. Zephyrinus had his position challenged by the first of what's called an anti-pope, someone who declares themselves as the legitimate pope in opposition to the officially recognized one. There will be roughly 40 more anti-popes throughout history, and they are given this title as they are not recognized by the Catholic Church as official popes. Calixtus I was a slave in his former youth and was eventually freed and given refuge by the previous Pope Victor. When he eventually became Pope, he controversially allowed priests to marry and forgave all sins, including murder and adultery. It said he was martyred by being thrown down a well. Urban I oversaw an era of peaceful times for Christians in the Roman Empire, causing it to grow. He's the first pope whose papal dates can be definitively confirmed as 222 to 230. Pontian was arrested by the Romans for being Christian and exiled to a Sardinian mine where he died, and he was the first pope to resign after being arrested to make way for a new leader. Anterus is known for having one of the shortest papacies of only 43 days. Fabian is famous for being elected pope after a dove landed on his head during the election process. Insisting this was a sign from the Holy Spirit, he was immediately chosen as the new pope. Cornelius led during a schism in the church and even more persecutions by Roman Emperor Trebonianus Gallus, who had him exiled and later killed. Lucius I was also banished soon after becoming pope by the same emperor, but was eventually allowed to return. Stephen I defended the church against the Novatian Schism and is said to have been beheaded during Mass under the orders of Emperor Valerian. Sixtus II was also famously beheaded under Valerian's persecutions, along with multiple other members of the church. Dionysius led the recovery of the church after Emperor Valerian was killed by the king of Persia. Felix I settled important debates about the nature of Christ with the help of Roman Emperor Aurelian. Eutychian is one of the most unknown popes, whose exact reigning dates are debated, but he's said to have overseen a quiet era of relative peace, which is why not much is known about him. Gaius is said to have structured the position of bishops in the church and also suffered even more persecutions by the Romans. Marcellinus was martyred during Emperor Diocletian's persecution of Christians and is also why not much is known about him. Marcellus I had a short reign, but it was during political and military turmoil in Rome, which caused him to be banished. Around this time, the Council of Elvira was the first recorded attempt to enforce celibacy of the clergy. Most priests, bishops, and even popes were married, and celibacy was just a suggestion but not a strict rule, as many of the apostles, including Peter, had wives. Eusebius supported church views that the Romans opposed and was exiled by the emperor and then died soon after. Miltiades was from North Africa and saw a huge turning point when the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great gave Christianity legal status in the Roman Empire in the Edict of Milan. He gave the popes a palace which would become the new residence for future popes. Sylvester I had a long reign and saw one of the most important events in the history of Christianity, when Roman Emperor Constantine further adopted Christianity, granted power to the papacy, and left Rome. He moved his empire's capital to the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, turning it into Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul in Turkey, which begins the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire. Around this time, there were roughly 5 million Christians, and this made up 10% of the Roman Empire. Mark was only pope for 10 months, but created the Basilica of San Marco in Rome, which is named after him and still exists today. Julius I was known for setting December 25th as the official celebrated date of Christmas, or Jesus' birthday. Although his true date of birth is unknown, December 25th is more of a symbolic date to be universally celebrated. Liberius was the first pope not to be venerated as a saint by the Catholic Church. He was imprisoned for disagreeing with the Roman emperor, who replaced him with the anti-pope Felix II, but was later released after 2 years and restored his position after expelling the anti-pope Felix. Damasus produced the first Latin translation of the Bible and saw Christianity become the Roman Empire's official religion, banning paganism. Siricius made some of the first rules for the church on discipline and penance, such as the first decree banning priests from marrying after being ordained, although if they were previously married that was still okay. He is the oldest completely preserved letters and is said to have been the first to call himself pope, which comes from the Latin and Greek word papa, meaning father. Previously they were called the head of the church or the bishop of Rome. Anastasius had a short and quiet reign, but was known for helping to reform the churches in Alexandria, Egypt, and North Africa. Innocent I is known for his letters defending Rome's authority and the role of the Pope. He saw the historic sack of Rome in 410 by the German Visigoths, and this was the first time in 800 years the city had fallen to a foreign enemy, and this marked the beginning of the Roman Empire's collapse. Zosimus reversed some of the policies of his predecessor. He was known to have a temper and had many disputes with other members within the church. Boniface I was an advocate of papal supremacy and also had disagreements with factions in the church. He was contemporary of the important Christian philosopher Saint Augustine of Hippo. Celestine I was known for strongly combating heresy within the church and his condemnations of differing views. Sixtus III saw the further decline of the Western Roman Empire and had theological debates helping to reform and restructure the church. Leo I, also known as Leo the Great, had an extremely long reign, the 10th longest ever. He famously met with Attila the Hun, one of the most feared conquerors in history, and persuaded him not to invade Rome, demonstrating the new powerful influence of the Pope. Hilarius led the church as the Western Roman Empire was nearing its end and clashed with the Archbishop of Constantinople in the east. Simplicius reigned during what's seen as the end of the Western Roman Empire, when the 16-year-old Romulus Augustus, Rome's last emperor, was deposed by the barbarian general Odoacer, who made himself king of the Italian peninsula. Felix III faced many disputes and conflicts within the church and also the effects of the fallen Roman Empire. Gelasius I was from North Africa, either modern-day Algeria or Tunisia. He was a prolific writer and wrote famous doctrines that established the Pope as having ultimate power over the universal church. The new king Odoacer would be overthrown by the German Ostrogoth king Theodoric the Great, who would become the next king. Anastasius II saw a major divide grow between the West and East Church and is the second pope in the church's first 500 years not to be made a saint. He also saw the Frankish king Clovis I convert to Catholicism, which was the foundation of Catholic France. He was the first major European ruler to be a Catholic Christian, as opposed to other barbarian tribes which were Arian or Nicene Christians. Symmachus would also see the divide with the Eastern Church, and he had a controversial papacy which was challenged by a dispute over his election because the Eastern Church had elected the anti-pope Laurentius. Hormisdas is known for helping to resolve the divide between the Western Roman Church and the Eastern Church in Constantinople. John I continued this by leading successful diplomatic trips to Constantinople, but had a short-lived rule after he was imprisoned by the Ostrogoth king and died due to his treatment. Felix IV was chosen to be the next pope by that same Ostrogoth king, and his legitimacy was questioned because of this outside favoritism. This was one of the first times we would see the papacy being influenced by kings and rulers. Boniface II was chosen by his predecessor Felix, which continues this outside Germanic influence. He was the first Germanic pope and also had a disputed but short reign. John II was the first pope to adopt a new papal name instead of his birth name Mercurius after taking the position. He removed a bishop for his adultery. Agapetus ruled for a short time, but is known for unsuccessfully attempting to persuade the Byzantine emperor not to invade the Ostrogoth kingdom, which controlled all of Italy at the time. Silverius was deposed by the Byzantines and exiled to a small Italian island where he starved to death. Vigilius was the first Byzantine pope. He was arrested over a dispute with the Byzantine emperor Justinian and died after his release while returning to Rome. Pelagius I was a chosen candidate of Justinian, which sparked disputes over his legitimacy by the Western Church. This period was also the height of the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire. John III reigned during complex political situations with the death of Emperor Justinian, wars in the Balkans between the Avars, Persians and Arabs, and the Lombard invasion of Italy. Also during this time, the Islamic prophet Muhammad was born around 570. Benedict I saw more difficulties from the Lombard conflict, which prevented Constantinople from confirming his election for 11 months. At this time, there were roughly 30 million Christians in the world. Pelagius II unsuccessfully attempted to get the Franks to help against the Lombards and died of a bubonic plague which hit Rome in 590. Gregory I, also known as Gregory the Great, was one of the most influential popes for converting the mostly pagan English Anglo-Saxons and aligning most of Europe to Catholicism. He also carried out significant charity work to feed the poor, which made him loved by the Roman people. The Gregorian chant is often attributed to him. Sabinian had a short and unpopular time because, unlike his predecessor Gregory, who gave out free food during a famine, Sabinian tried to charge for it, so he was so hated his funeral procession had to change course due to angry crowds. Boniface III was only pope for 10 months, but he made much needed improvements to the election process of the papacy. Boniface IV converted the abandoned Pantheon in Rome into a Christian church and oversaw the establishment of the first English church. Also during this time in 610, Islam was born as the Prophet Muhammad had his revelations and became the first Muslim. Deodatus I had a short and quiet reign, so not much is known about him, besides that he was the first priest in nearly 100 years to be elected directly to Pope. Boniface V helped to organise the new English church and influenced King Edwin of Northumbria to convert to Christianity. Honorius I saw the Eastern Church try and promote a new controversial teaching called monothelitism, which believed that Jesus only had one nature or will, going against the Western Church's long-held belief that he had two natures or wills, the divine and the human. This fierce debate would divide the Church for the next 50 years. Honorius was denounced for initially subscribing to monothelitism and not pushing back against it. Also, during his papacy, the Islamic prophet Muhammad would die in 632. His successors began the expansion of the first Muslim empire and conquered Jerusalem, which concerned the European Christians. Severinus was prevented from officially becoming pope after he was elected for 18 months by the Byzantine emperor for refusing to accept monothelitism. After finally becoming pope, he died after just 2 months. John IV clashed with the Irish and Scottish churches over the timekeeping of Easter and condemned monothelitism as heresy. Theodore I was the only pope from Jerusalem, where he was a bishop and had to flee after the Muslims' invasion. As pope, he also had to deal with the struggles over monothelitism. Martin I took a strong stance against monothelitism, so the Byzantine Emperor Constans II arrested and banished him. Dying soon after, he is the last pope to be recognized as a martyr. Eugene I also ended up in a dispute with Emperor Constans, who threatened him with the same fate as Martin, but the emperor was busy defending his empire from the Muslim conquests, and Eugene died before he could be punished. Vitalian had a long reign and was remembered for somewhat mending the relationship with Constantinople. He exchanged gifts with Emperor Constans and even improved relationships with the English Church. Deodatus II had a short papacy focused on improving the church buildings and also continuing to fight monothelitism. Donus was only pope for a short time, where he expanded the clergy of Rome and also ended a dispute with Ravenna. Agatho finally got the Eastern Church to reject monothelitism and agree that Jesus only had two natures or wills, ending the long-running dispute between the East and West. Church records state he lived to over 100 years, but modern research can't completely verify this. Leo II confirmed the policies of Agatho and denounced the earlier Pope Honorius for tolerating and not being firm enough against monothelitism. He and the next 3 popes would only rule for around a year. Benedict II got the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople to decree that popes could be elected without needing to be confirmed by the emperor, but the tradition would still sometimes continue. John V was the first pope elected without needing the approval of the emperor during a time of good relations with Constantinople. Conon became the next pope after 2 factions within the church disputed over who should be the next leader. He was chosen as a compromise but also had a short reign. Sergius I was elected as the next pope after Conon's death, which saw an armed conflict and dispute in the papal residence between 2 candidates that both used bribes and violence to try and secure the position. Both of them were ousted and Sergius was chosen. John VI successfully persuaded the Lombards to withdraw from the Roman territories they had previously conquered. John VII created even better relations with the Lombards but had disputes with the Byzantine Emperor Justinian II. Sicinius was already elderly when elected, suffering from severe gout, and was unable to feed himself using his hands. He was only pope for around 20 days before he died, the 5th shortest reign. Constantine was one of the last Byzantine popes and was known for visiting Constantinople, where he improved relations with the Emperor Justinian II. During his reign, the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate invaded and conquered what is now Spain and Portugal. which would be mostly held under Islamic rule for the next 500 years. Gregory II clashed with the new Byzantine emperor over the iconoclasm controversy, which was around worshipping idols or imagery. He also strengthened ties with the English and Irish churches, and through negotiations with the Lombards saw the first expansion of papal territory. Gregory III was from Syria and would be the last pope not from Europe for 1200 years until Francis in 2013. He saw further disputes with the Byzantines and Lombards. Also, the Islamic Umayyad Caliphate was at its height as the largest empire in the world and invaded central France, where they were eventually defeated in the Battle of Tours, marking an important moment when the Muslims' further expansion into Europe was halted. Zachary was the last Byzantine pope and forbid the trafficking of slaves through Rome. After he died, his successor Stephen I was elected but died of a stroke only days later before being officially consecrated as pope, so he is only considered Pope-elect. Stephen II faced invasions from the Lombards and couldn't get help from the Byzantines, so he went to Pepin, the king of the Franks, confirming him as king, which was the first time a pope demonstrated his power over a monarch. In exchange, Pepin defeated the Lombards and gifted some of their land to the pope, further expanding the papal territory and creating a new country called the Papal States, which the popes would now also rule over from here onwards. Paul I was the brother of his predecessor Stephen, who were both from the powerful Orsini family that produced 5 popes and 34 cardinals. Paul strengthened relations with the Franks and Lombards, distancing the papacy from the Byzantines. Stephen III became pope after a violent dispute over the next candidate, which saw many rivals being blinded and having their tongues cut out and then imprisoned. Adrian I was the longest reigning pope so far and the 6th longest ever. It would be another 1,000 years before another ruled as long as him. He saw the territory disputes between the Lombards and the Frankish kings Charlemagne and his brother Carloman, sons of the previous king Pepin. It's believed he lived to age 95, making him the oldest pope ever, but this can't be fully verified. Leo III famously crowned Frankish king Charlemagne as the first Holy Roman Emperor. He was one of the most powerful and influential rulers in European history and the first Western emperor since the fall of the Roman Empire. Although they are now called the Holy Roman Emperors, the actual Holy Roman Empire as a territory wouldn't be officially established for another 150 years. Stephen IV was from a powerful Roman family and only ruled for a year, crowning Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, as the next Holy Roman Emperor, further demonstrating how the popes now crown the emperors instead of the other way around. Paschal I crowned and anointed Louis' son Lothair as the next Holy Roman Emperor. Paschal suppressed an uprising from his opposition where the perpetrators were blinded and beheaded. Eugene II was elected as a candidate chosen by the Franks, who now had influence over the papacy. He saw the first Muslim invasion of Sicily, which they would eventually conquer after 70 more years of battles and invasions. He established schools and cared for orphans, widows, and the poor, earning the title Father of the People. Valentine was rushed to the position of Pope by the Roman nobility before he was even ordained as priest. The first time this happened, he was unusually close to his predecessor Eugene, leading to rumors about their relationship. He was only Pope for 40 days. Gregory IV had a long papacy where he saw the end of the iconoclasm controversy with the Byzantines. He mediated disputes between the Frankish emperor and his sons and saw the breakup of the Frankish Carolingian Empire. Sergius II contributed to urban redevelopment of Rome and was criticized for not adequately dealing with the Muslims that were invading the outskirts of Rome. Leo IV is known for fortifying the walls of Rome, further protecting the city, and organized Italian armies that defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Ostia. This was the first time a pope directed a military into war and showcased their new power. Benedict III became the next pope after 2 less popular candidates were initially chosen and Benedict was briefly imprisoned. He was then made pope due to popular opinion, but only ruled for 2 years. Nicholas I was the last of 3 popes known as the Great. He consolidated the papal authority over all Christians, even royalty. He also refused the Frankish king's marriage annulment and saw relations with the Byzantines further sour. Adrian II continued the policies of Nicholas, but he had a difficult relationship with the Frankish king, whose advisor's son married his daughter and the son later killed Adrian's daughter and wife. John VIII dealt with the growing problem of the Muslim invasions of Italy, and without much support. This weakened the Muslim and Christian relations, and he reinforced Rome's defences but was assassinated by his own clerics, being poisoned and clubbed to death. Marinus I became pope controversially as he was already a bishop of a different church. He had a good relationship with the English king Alfred the Great, who he gifted a piece of the cross Jesus was believed to have been crucified on. Adrian III had a brief reign, but is known for helping the people of Italy that were suffering from famine and war. Stephen V alleviated the famine caused by drought and locusts by giving to the poor out of his father's wealth, as the papal treasury had run dry. He also redeemed slaves and repaired churches. Formosus intervened in the power struggles of Constantinople and France, and controversially encouraged wars to overthrow an Italian king. After the Pope died, his dead body was dug up, dressed, and put on trial, where his corpse was found guilty and thrown into a river. Boniface VI was elected after the riots from the death of the previous Formosus. He was described as a monster guilty of adultery and murder. He was only pope for 15 days, the second shortest reign ever after he died from gout, or possibly being killed to make way for a new leader. Stephen VI was the pope famous for the public spectacle of digging up the rotting corpse of Pope Formosus and condemning it in what was called the cadaver trial. He was later imprisoned and then strangled to death. Romanus was sympathetic to Formosus, reversing some of the actions of the previous Pope Stephen, sparking a divide in the church. Romanus was removed as pope after just 3 months and confined to a monastery. Theodore II was only pope for 20 days and was also a supporter of Formosus. He too condemned the actions of Stephen and recovered Formosus's body from the river and gave it a proper burial at Old St. Peter's Basilica. John IX helped to calm some of the chaos from the recent events, approving the decisions of his predecessor Theodore and burning the records from the famous cadaver trial. Benedict IV saw Sicily fall to the Muslims after 70 years of invasions and wars. Islam had secured the southern Italian island, which became the Emirate of Sicily for the next 250 years. He also crowned the Italian king Louis the Blind as Holy Roman Emperor. Leo V was only pope for 4 months and was deposed and imprisoned by a cardinal called Christopher, who became an anti-pope for a few months before he was deposed. Both him and Leo were strangled in prison. Sergius III was elected by the powerful ruler of Rome, Theophlact, who he may have been related to. This began a dark and turbulent age of the papacy called Saeculum Obscurum. Sergius was very controversial for refusing to crown a Holy Roman Emperor, supporting a Byzantine emperor's 4th marriage, having both previous popes Leo and Christopher strangled in prison, and allegedly fathering an illegitimate child with Theophlact's daughter Marozia. This child would later become pope. Anastasius III also became pope by Theophlact, whose family would control the next 100 years of popes, continuing the dark era of Saeculum Obscurum. Lando was the next pope for less than a year during a turbulent period, and he dealt with further Muslim conquests into Roman territories. John X had a long reign and personally led Christian armies into battle, successfully defeating the invading Muslims in central Italy. He later fell out with Marozia, the daughter of Theophlact, and she had him imprisoned where he died. Leo VI was chosen as the next pope by Marozia, the most powerful person in Rome at the time. He ruled for around 6 months during a period of anarchy. Stephen VII became pope as another candidate chosen by Marozia, and he was known for his severe treatment of clergy who deviated in their morals. John XI was the son of Marozia, who made sure he became pope, and he was elected around age 20. He was also rumoured to be the illegitimate child from Marozia's affair with the previous pope Sergius. John saw his mother finally ousted from power by her other son and his brother Alberic, and John would support a congregation that would later massively reform the church. Leo VII was placed into the papacy by Alberic, the new ruler of Rome, after overthrowing his mother Marozia. Stephen VIII also became the next pope, being chosen by Alberic. He intervened in disputes between the French kings and was caught up in conflicts between Alberic and an Italian king. Marinus II was elected once again through the intervention of Alberic. He supported clergy reforms throughout Germany and France. Agapetus II saw the papacy's power become further limited because of Alberic's rule, and was only able to manage internal church affairs. John XII was one of the most morally depraved and controversial popes in history. He was the illegitimate son of Alberic and took his father's position as ruler of Rome after his death, and then became pope as a teenager. It's said he acted more as an evil king than a pope, and he turned the papal residence into a brothel, sleeping with copious amounts of women, including his niece. He led wars to reclaim the lost papal state territory and allied with King Otto of Germany, who he crowned as Holy Roman Emperor. Otto then turned on John and besieged Rome, temporarily replacing him with a new pope, Leo VIII, who then fled when John returned, mutilated his enemies, and made himself pope again. John was then allegedly caught sleeping with a married woman and killed by her husband when he caught them. Benedict V was elected into the papacy by the people of Rome, but against the wishes of the Holy Roman Emperor Otto. After just 30 days as pope, Otto deposed and exiled Benedict to Germany, where he died. Also at this point, Emperor Otto had officially established the Holy Roman Empire as a territory that would last for the next 900 years. Leo VIII, who was temporarily pope during the chaos of John VII, was reinstalled as pope officially thanks to the Emperor Otto after removing Benedict, the previous pope chosen by the Romans. Leo had a trouble-free but short reign of just 9 months and granted even more power to Otto. John XIII was also chosen by Emperor Otto. He was temporarily imprisoned by a Roman militia who disliked the emperor's foreign influence. Otto marched on Rome with an enormous army, and John was reinstated, brutally executing the Romans who plotted against him. Benedict VI was chosen as the next pope again by Otto, but was also unpopular, being seen as a puppet of the emperor. When Otto died, the Romans imprisoned Benedict, replacing him with the anti-pope Boniface VII. Otto's son and new emperor Otto II demanded that Benedict be released, but this anti-pope Boniface had Benedict killed in prison, and he then fled to Constantinople after being the unofficial pope for 30 days. Benedict VII was chosen by Otto to replace the anti-pope Boniface. Benedict ruled unopposed for over 8 years, bringing a short period of stability. John XIV would become the next pope, once again chosen by Otto II without the consultation of the Romans. Otto soon died of malaria in John's arms, making his 3-year-old son Otto III emperor. Without support, John was deposed and killed in prison by the previous anti-pope Boniface, who returned from Constantinople and once again took the papacy, ruling unofficially for a year before he was overthrown and killed. John XV was the next pope for 10 years, but he had little authority. He helped to mediate disputes between England and France and died of a fever before he could officially coronate Otto III as the new Holy Roman Emperor. Gregory V was chosen as the next pope at around age 24 as the cousin of Otto III, crowning him as Holy Roman Emperor and granting him even more privileges. But when Otto returned to Germany, Gregory was forced to flee Rome and replaced by an anti-pope, John XVI. Otto marched on Rome, capturing and mutilating the anti-pope, restoring Gregory to the papacy until he died suspiciously. Sylvester II was the first French pope and was an intellectual scholar who tutored and had a close relationship with the previous emperors Otto I, II, and III, and their cousin, the previous Pope Gregory. Otto III supported him to become the next pope, and they both fled when the Romans revolted against them. Otto III died attempting to retake Rome, and Sylvester was allowed to return as pope, but died shortly after. John XVII was the next pope, being chosen by the new ruler of Rome, John Crescentius, and was pope for around 6 months. John XVIII also became pope, chosen by John Crescentius, but had little power as his puppet. He was caught in the power struggle between Crescentius and the new Holy Roman Emperor Henry. He later abdicated as pope. Sergius IV reigned when the Muslim leader Al-Hakim of the Fatimids ordered the complete demolition of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Considered the holiest site in all of Christianity as the place where Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected, Jesus' tomb was also completely destroyed, along with many other important churches in the Holy Land, Syria, and Egypt. Some were converted into mosques, and Christians were banned from worship, being forced to convert or face death. This angered the Christian world and would lay the foundations for the Crusades, a series of wars over centuries in an attempt to reclaim the Holy Land and expel the Muslims. Benedict VIII was born to a powerful Tusculum family that had already produced 3 previous popes. He was opposed by the anti-pope Gregory VI, but was restored as pope by the Holy Roman Emperor Henry. He dealt with more attacks from the Muslims who ruled Sicily at the time and defeated them in Sardinia with the help of the Normans. John XIX was also from the powerful Tusculum family and was the brother of his predecessor. He saw relations sour with Constantinople and was said to have been killed by an angry mob of peasants. Benedict IX was the nephew of his predecessor John and would be pope 3 separate times, the only pope to serve more than once. The first time he was elected at age 20 by his godfather bribing the Romans. He's said to have committed unspeakable acts in the bedroom as well as several murders, and after 12 years he was forced out of the papacy and Rome. Sylvester III replaced Benedict as the next pope for 56 days after fierce infighting, but was deposed and excommunicated after Benedict returned with an army. Benedict IX became pope for the second time, but doubted his ability to maintain his position and also wanted to marry his cousin, so he sold the papacy to his godfather, whose bribes made him pope the first time. Gregory VI was the godfather of that controversial Pope Benedict and paid him to become the next pope. He violently put down rebellions against him, and then his godson Benedict returned from Rome after being unable to marry his cousin. The clergy then went to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry III to solve the chaos, who deposed the previous popes Sylvester and Benedict. Gregory resigned, admitting to purchasing the papacy. Clement II was chosen as the next pope by Emperor Henry after all the chaos. He officially crowned Henry as Holy Roman Emperor and then crowned the Queen of Germany, but died after just 9 months, possibly due to poison. Benedict IX became pope again for the 3rd time after Clement's mysterious death. Despite being officially deposed by the Emperor Henry, he ignored this and seized the palace, becoming pope again for another 8 months. He was finally driven out by a German army. Damasus II was chosen by Emperor Henry as the next pope, but died after just 23 days in the position, either by being poisoned by a friend of the exiled Benedict or from malaria. Leo IX was one of the most important popes in history for his actions that would cause the Great Schism, permanently separating the Western Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church in Constantinople, with there being roughly 50 million Christians in the world at the time. He died shortly after waging a war on the Normans, which he lost. Victor II managed to restore some of the papacy's lost possessions and authority. He saw the death of the Holy Roman Emperor Henry III, and Victor was the guardian of his infant son Henry IV, so he wielded significant power. Stephen IX was a friend of the previous Pope Leo and continued his policies enforcing celibacy in the church and battling the Normans. He attempted to crown his brother as Holy Roman Emperor and was said to have been poisoned by the Romans. Nicholas II challenged the anti-Pope Benedict X, who was elected through bribery and corruption. Nicholas gained popular support and allied with the Normans to become the official pope, deposing the anti-Pope Benedict. He importantly reformed papal elections to now be controlled by Roman cardinals, not the Roman aristocracy or Holy Roman emperors. Alexander II became pope under the new voting system, excommunicating the anti-pope Honorius II that the Germans had tried to elect. He was a fierce defender of the Jews from persecution and launched a crusade to remove the Muslims from Spain. He saw the Normans' first invasion to try and remove the Muslims from Sicily, which would later be successful, and he authorized the Norman William the Conqueror's famous invasion of Britain in 1066. Gregory VII is known for implementing what's called the Gregorian reforms, fighting against corruption and enforcing celibacy and discipline for the clergy. He also changed how bishops were installed and much more. He was exiled after a difficult power struggle with the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, whose influence over the papacy was weakened, leading to them both deposing and excommunicating each other. Henry installed the anti-pope Clement III, who for 20 years would challenge the next 3 popes. Victor III was already powerful as the Abbot of Monte Cassino and became Pope, challenging the anti-Pope Clement with the help of the Normans. He declared a crusade against the Muslims in North Africa and, in poor health, died shortly after. Urban II led one of the most important points in history when he declared the first of the Crusades to reclaim Jerusalem and the Holy Land from the Muslims who had previously conquered it. He also declared them against the Muslims controlling Spain and against the Seljuk Turk invasion of the Byzantine Empire, which would later become the Ottoman Empire. He promised forgiveness for the sins of troops that would fight in these wars, and also during his reign, Muslim rule over Sicily was defeated by the Normans. Paschal II had a long reign of 18 years, seeing the First Crusade successfully reclaim Jerusalem and also launching another crusade in Spain. He had disputes with the English King Henry I and Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, and also removed 4 anti-popes that opposed him. Gelasius II was unanimously elected as the next pope, but spent much of his year in exile due to his disputes with Emperor Henry V, who installed another anti-pope, Gregory VIII. Gelasius was protected by the Normans and had both Henry and his anti-pope excommunicated before he died in exile. Calixtus II was already a powerful noble and further clashed with Emperor Henry, who he also excommunicated, as well as his anti-pope Gregory, who he imprisoned. After Jews were being killed in the Crusades, he strictly forbid Christians from harming them. He also oversaw the First Lateran Council, which, among other things, officially banned marriage for the clergy, which up until now was just a suggestion. Honorius II became pope by force after a rival candidate, Celestine II, was unanimously elected. Honorius attacked and wounded Celestine, who then resigned. He was the first pope to confirm the election of a Holy Roman Emperor, Lothair III, and gave recognition to the famous crusade military order known as the Knights Templar. Innocent II was quickly elected pope and was then opposed by an anti-pope, Anacletus II, who was powerful enough to take control of Rome, forcing Innocent to flee. With the help of Emperor Lothair, who he crowned, they unsuccessfully tried to depose Anacletus twice, but he died, allowing Innocent to become pope again. He officially sanctioned the Knights Templar to fight in the Crusades. Celestine II ruled only for 5 months, but intervened in Roman, English, and French politics, and he further empowered the Knights Templar. Lucius II was involved in the politics of England and Portugal. He had a conflict with the King of Sicily and faced a Roman revolution that attempted to remove the papacy's power over the city. He personally led an army to put down the revolt, but died from injuries after being hit by a rock in battle. Eugene III reigned at a time when not many wanted the unpopular position of Pope, and he wasn't able to reside in Rome. After Muslims recaptured the city of Edessa, he launched the Second Crusade, which was the first of many failures to recapture the territory in the Holy Land taken in the First Crusade. Anastasius IV was only pope for a year and a half and mediated a long-running dispute with the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick over appointing an archbishop. Adrian IV was the first and only English pope. He restored papal authority in Rome, but his relations with the new Holy Roman Emperor Frederick soured. He had good relations with England and famously authorized King Henry II to invade Ireland. Alexander III had an extremely long reign of almost 22 years, the 8th longest ever, and he would be rivaled by 4 anti-popes chosen by other cardinals and Emperor Frederick, causing Alexander to spend much of his papacy outside Rome. After being reconfirmed as pope, he rejected the Byzantine offers to end the East-West Schism, authorized the Northern Crusades, and held the Third Council of the Lateran, one of the most important church councils of the medieval era. Lucius III was previously a papal diplomat, but as pope spent most of it in exile due to conflicts in Rome. He had many disputes with Emperor Frederick and died while making the final preparations for the Third Crusade. Urban III also had similar clashes with Emperor Frederick over Tuscan land and refused to crown his son Henry as King of Italy. He helped bring a 2-year truce between England and France and later died of shock and grief after hearing about Christian defeats in the Holy Land Crusades. Gregory VIII was only pope for 2 months, but helped repair the relationship with the Holy Roman Emperor and officially declared the Third Crusade before dying of a fever. Clement III ended half a century of conflict between the papacy and the city of Rome, allowing the Pope to finally return to Rome after many years in exile. He persuaded the kings of England and France to join in the Third Crusade. Celestine III was the third pope from the Orsini family. He crowned Henry VI as Holy Roman Emperor, but was threatened to excommunicate him for imprisoning the English King Richard I. He wanted to resign as pope due to his age, but was not allowed to by the cardinals and died shortly after. Innocent III was one of the most powerful popes of the medieval era, having large influence over the Christian nations and leading church reforms through the Fourth Lateran Council. He also expanded the Crusades in Spain and France and launched the Fourth Crusade in the Holy Land, where the Crusaders went against his orders to sack and destroy most of Constantinople. Honorius III, being born in Rome, was loved by the Roman people. He launched the Fifth Crusade, getting the King of Hungary and Holy Roman Emperor to participate. Also at this time, the famous Genghis Khan massively expanded the Mongol Empire. Gregory IX was the cousin of the previous Pope Innocent III, and he led a smaller crusade to put down a revolt in Germany and launched the Sixth Crusade, which saw the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II reclaim Jerusalem. But Gregory would then, for the first time, engage in direct war with the emperor, known as the War of the Keys. After initial success, he saw the Pope's army eventually destroyed, and Gregory was forced to negotiate peace. Celestine IV was elected after a long and contested election process, while Emperor Frederick had Rome under siege. The cardinals were locked in a derelict building for weeks until they could decide on the next pope. Rainwater and sewage leaked from the roof on them, excrement built up, and there were food shortages, causing the death of one papal candidate. After Celestine was finally elected, he died after just 17 days because of the election's conditions, and he was already in an old and feeble state. He had the third shortest papacy ever. Innocent IV would become the next pope after a year-and-a-half vacancy where a pope couldn't be agreed upon, which was the longest vacancy so far. Unable to resolve a dispute with Emperor Frederick, Innocent was forced to flee Rome until he returned after Frederick's death. He approved a crusade against Lithuanian and Prussian rebels and tried to negotiate the Mongols, who had conquered much of the world and Eastern Europe, to stop. Alexander IV attempted to reunite the Western Catholic Church with the Eastern Orthodox Church. He established inquisitions in France and tried to organize a crusade against the Mongolian invasion of Poland, as the Mongol Empire reached its height as the largest empire in the world at the time and the second largest in history. Urban IV saw the fall of the Latin Empire of Constantinople, founded during the Fourth Crusade. He led armies against Manfred, the king of Sicily and the son of the late Holy Roman Emperor Frederick, who had long disputed with the papacy. He also had the important philosopher Thomas Aquinas write texts for Mass. Clement IV allied with Charles, the youngest brother of the King of France, who would defeat Manfred and become the new King of Sicily. He worked with Thomas Aquinas to create schools to study philosophy and attempted to negotiate an alliance with the Mongolians. Gregory X became the next pope after a nearly 3-year vacancy where cardinals were unable to agree on a successor, the longest papal election in history. Gregory was elected while in the Holy Land, while overseeing the Ninth Crusade, and returned to Italy. He discussed a cooperation with the Mongol Empire's leader Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, and the young famous explorer Marco Polo helped to relay these messages from Europe over to Asia. Innocent V became the first pope elected in the new process called the Papal Conclave. Established by his predecessor after the chaos of the previous elections, now cardinals will be locked in a building with limited supplies so their voting could be mostly free of outside influence. He attempted a reunion with the Eastern Church but would die after just 5 months. Adrian V was only pope for 38 days and died before being ordained as a priest, but had previously been a successful mediator between the English king and barons. As pope, he abolished the new papal conclave election process, which wouldn't be in effect for the next few elections. John XXI was the first and only Portuguese pope. He attempted to launch a new crusade for the Holy Land and pushed for a reunion with the Eastern Church. But after just 5 months as pope, he was alone in his apartment and the ceiling collapsed and he died from his injuries. Nicholas III is the 4th pope from the Orsini family. He strengthened the Pope's position in Italy, but was also criticized for nepotism, electing many of his relatives as cardinals and to powerful positions. The famous writer Dante, who lived at the same time, depicted Nicholas in the 8th circle of hell in his Inferno poem. Martin IV was the last French pope to rule in Rome and was previously involved in many conclaves. He excommunicated the Eastern Roman Emperor, which further worsened relations with the Eastern Church. He also saw Sicily overthrow King Charles and died suddenly of an unknown illness. Honorius IV was elected unanimously and was loved by the Romans, being born there himself. He oversaw a difficult power struggle for the next king of Sicily, and the Mongolians offered to help remove the Muslims from the Holy Land, but he was unable to gather an army and died soon after. Nicholas IV was the first Franciscan to be elected pope. Part of the Catholic group established by Francis of Assisi, he intervened in the power struggle in Sicily, crowning Charles II as king, and he attempted to launch another crusade for the Holy Land. Celestine V became pope after a 2-year vacancy where cardinals were again unable to make a decision. He had no political experience and was an ineffective pope, with many of his policies being reversed, but his only lasting decree was for the pope to have the right to resign. He exercised this right and resigned after just 5 months, wanting to return to his previous humble life, and he was then imprisoned by the next pope, where he died in prison. Boniface VIII asserted the strongest claims of power of any pope, intervening in the foreign affairs of France, Sicily, Italy, and trying to stop the English invasion of Scotland. His power caused many conflicts with European monarchs, where the King of France, Philip IV, sent his troops to attack the Pope at his home, where he died soon after. Benedict XI was chosen as the next Pope because he would have better relationships with the French King Philip, and he arranged an armistice between Philip and the English King Edward I. Benedict died suddenly after just 8 months, while some suspect he was poisoned. Clement V, being a Frenchman, moved the papacy from Rome to the French city of Avignon. This is where the next 6 popes would reside for nearly 70 years, a period notorious for its corruption and alienating the enemies of France, such as England. Along with the wishes of the French king, he suppressed and executed much of the Knights Templar, who had become unpopular, being accused of corruption and immorality. He also launched another crusade against the Holy Land, known as the Crusade of the Poor, which only ended up conquering the Byzantine city of Rhodes instead. John XXII had the longest reign of the Avignon popes of 18 years. He opposed the Holy Roman Emperor Louis IV, who invaded Italy and set up an anti-pope. John also made philosopher Thomas Aquinas a saint. He declared witchcraft to be punishable as heresy after someone tried to assassinate him using sorcery and poison. Benedict XII introduced significant reforms against nepotism in the church, but the problem would still continue for centuries. He unsuccessfully tried to resolve disputes with Emperor Louis IV, and despite being French, he also didn't have a great relationship with the French King Philip. During this time, England and France began their 100-year war. Clement VI was the Pope when the Black Death or bubonic plague first hit Europe, which killed roughly 50% of Europe's population and caused chaos. Massive persecutions erupted around Europe, widely blaming the Jews for the plague. An estimated 50,000 were executed and thousands were burned alive. Clement took a firm stance dismissing these claims and ordering clergy to protect the Jews from violence. He also launched a successful crusade to combat Turkish piracy in the Aegean Sea. Clement purchased Avignon, officially adding the French city to the Papal States territory. Innocent VI abolished a signed agreement declaring that cardinals were superior to the Pope and repaired the relationship with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV. He was largely responsible for the treaty ending the first phase of the England and France 100-year war. He also declined an offer to unite the Orthodox and Roman churches and dealt with financial challenges due to his wars in Italy and the aftermath of the plague, where he sold art to raise funds. Urban V lived a life of modesty. Even as Pope, he restored and constructed many churches and monasteries. He tried to reunite the Eastern and Western churches, but without much success, and he launched the successful crusade on the Egyptian city of Alexandria, as well as crusades against the Ottomans, who had also started conquering much of the Byzantine Empire and would later take Constantinople, creating the Ottoman Empire. Gregory XI was the last of the Avignon French popes and moved the papacy back to Rome. He unsuccessfully tried to bring peace between the English and French kings in the middle of the 100 Years' War, and upon returning to Rome he declared war on many Italian city-states led by Florence, called the War of the Eight Saints, which only ended after his death. Urban VI would see one of the most turbulent and confusing times in the papacy's history, where his predecessor's decision to move back to Rome created the Western Schism. This would be the next 40 years of disputes over who was the legitimate pope, which fractured the Catholic Church. The French cardinals elected anti-pope Clement VII, who resided in Avignon while excommunicating Urban, calling him the Antichrist, and he was later forced to flee Rome, where he died after injuries falling from his mule. Boniface IX also had to deal with the Western Schism. He was the next pope in Rome, and Avignon had its own pope Clement VII and then Benedict XIII after he died, with Europe divided over who was the legitimate pope. Innocent VII became the next pope in Rome and made the mistake of elevating his unsuitable nephew as captain of the papal militia. He brutally murdered 11 of the pope's rival politicians, which caused chaos in Rome. Gregory XII would see the Western Schism become even more complicated as the Council of Pisa attempted to resolve the issue of two popes, but neither Gregory in Rome or the French Pope Benedict appeared. The Council of Pisa declared both of them deposed and elected a new pope, Alexander V, who reigned in Pisa near Florence, meaning there were now 3 popes as the previous 2 refused to resign. This new third pope, Alexander, then died, being succeeded by John XXIII, and at this point the Council of Constance would finally resolve the issue by getting rid of all 3 popes. Gregory in Rome agreed to resign, John in Pisa was deposed, and Benedict in Avignon was excommunicated. The Catholic Church only recognizes Gregory as the legitimate pope, with the others being considered anti-popes. Martin V was chosen by the Council of Constance as the next pope and marked the end of this very confusing Western Schism. Martin returned to Rome and established order, with the papacy unified under him. He also denounced the enslavement of Christians and sale to Muslims, while supporting the early Portuguese enslavement of Africans and colonial expansion. Around this time, Joan of Arc, who led victories for France in the 100-Year War, was captured by the English and burned at the stake at age 19. Eugene IV was the nephew of the previous Pope Gregory, who resigned to end the Western Schism. He mediated between the Spanish and Portuguese kingdoms, who had invented new large ships and had began colonizing the Canary Islands just off of Africa, forbidding the enslavement of Africans who had converted to Christianity, but authorizing the Portuguese to enslave unconverted Africans. Nicholas V saw one of the most important events in history, the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks, which now became the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. As well as that, the 100-Year War between England and France had just ended. He also got the anti-pope Felix V to submit, marking the permanent end of anti-popes from here onwards. He improved Rome's architecture and furthered the height of the Renaissance of art and culture. He ordered design plans of what would become the new St. Peter's Basilica, which is the largest and most important church in the world today. He also authorized the Portuguese to enslave Africans and compete with the Muslims' monopoly over the lucrative African slave trade. Calixtus III was from the powerful Borgia family, known for their corruption and rivalries with the Medici family. He was a strong supporter of more crusades against the Ottoman Turks after the fall of Constantinople, and ordered a crusade that defeated the Turks in Hungary, halting the Ottoman expansion into Europe. He also started the tradition of ringing church bells at noon to remind people to pray for the Crusaders, a tradition that still exists today. As well as that, he ordered the posthumous trial of Joan of Arc, which vindicated her after she was recently executed. Pius II was a successful diplomat and author who made the first autobiography of a pope. He called for a new crusade against the Ottomans and influenced the famous Vlad the Impaler, nicknamed Dracula, who engaged in many wars with the Ottomans, nearly assassinating the Sultan and impaling 23,000 Turks on spikes along a road of 60 miles. Paul II was the nephew of the previous Pope Eugene IV and was a reclusive, mysterious person. He made several controversial decisions, such as secretly electing cardinals through favoritism without publishing their names, and arresting some who opposed him. Sixtus IV was responsible for constructing the Sistine Chapel, which is named after him, and also the Vatican Library. As a patron of the arts, he brought together artists like Botticelli, which helped bring about the peak of the Renaissance in Rome. He also authorized the infamous Spanish Inquisition and was involved in the Pazzi conspiracy, which unsuccessfully attempted to remove the powerful Medici banking family who ruled Florence. Innocent VIII took further steps to condemn witchcraft and was given custody of the imprisoned brother and rival of the Ottoman Sultan, who paid the Pope enormous money to keep him in custody, and the Pope threatened to release him if the Sultan invaded the Balkans. The Spanish king also gifted Innocent 100 Spanish Muslim slaves, which were distributed amongst the cardinals. Alexander VI was the second pope from the Borgia family and is famous for his nepotism, corruption, and admitting to fathering 8 to 10 children by his mistresses. With Christopher Columbus's discoveries in the Americas, Alexander personally drew a line giving Spain almost all of the Americas, and Portugal would get Africa and Asia to colonize. The line would later be adjusted to become the Treaty of Tordesillas, which shows how the Pope had the influence to tell the two most powerful countries in the world where to draw their borders. Pius III attempted to bring about peace between the Spanish and French kings and in the Papal States, but died of sepsis after operations on a leg ulcer. He was only pope for around 27 days, the 8th shortest papacy. Julius II is nicknamed the Warrior or Battle Pope. He is one of the most powerful and influential popes, seeing himself as an emperor, and he took his papal name inspired by Julius Caesar. He expanded the power of the Papal States during the Italian Wars. The region to the north of Italy, which is now Switzerland, had some of the world's most skilled mercenaries who Julius hired to become the famous Swiss Guard, the Pope's personal army that still guards the Vatican today and is the oldest army in the world, with their bright uniform colours based on the Medici family crest. He also started the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica that stands today and commissioned Michelangelo's iconic paintings in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and Raphael's The School of Athens, among many others. Leo X was the first pope from the powerful banking and political Medici family and was elected at age 37. He led a costly war that placed his nephew as the Duke of a region of Italy. He destroyed church finances and most notably granted indulgences, the extremely controversial practice where Christians were promised forgiveness from sins in exchange for donating money to the church. This would be used to pay for the Sistine Chapel, among other things, and this would be one of the main criticisms of Martin Luther, who led the Protestant Reformation movement against the Catholic Church's corruption. Leo also had a pet elephant named Hanno. Adrian VI was the first and only Dutch pope, and the next 450 years of popes would all be Italian. He saw one of the greatest crises in the church's history. The Protestant Reformation movement began by Martin Luther, which broke away from Catholicism, criticizing the papacy's corruption and labeling the Pope as the Antichrist. Adrian condemned Martin Luther as a heretic and attempted some reforms to the church in response, but without much success. He died after a year and 8 months as Pope, and there were roughly 100 million Christians in the world at the time. Clement VII was the second Pope from the Medici family and is said to have been the unluckiest Pope ever. He ruled during a time of chaos as the Protestant Reformation spread and the church neared bankruptcy. The Ottoman Empire reached its height and began invading Eastern Europe, and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V invaded the Papal States and Rome, destroying and massacring much of the city and temporarily imprisoning the Pope after his Swiss Guard was annihilated. The infamous sack of Rome, as well as a plague and famine, reduced Rome's population by 80%, and this ended the main Italian's Renaissance era. To make matters worse, he then refused the famous King Henry VIII of England to divorce his wife, partly because she was the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles, who the Pope didn't want to further anger, resulting in England forever breaking away from the Catholic Church. On lighter notes, he commissioned more art from Raphael, Cellini, and Michelangelo and approved the groundbreaking theory from Copernicus that the Earth revolved around the Sun. Paul III became the next pope in the midst of this chaos and would initiate the Catholic Reformation with the Council of Trent. This would begin to reform the church's corruption. He also aided the Holy Roman Emperor's wars against the Protestants in Germany, and then was criticized for his own nepotism, making his 14 and 16-year-old grandsons cardinals and one of his many illegitimate sons a duke in Italy. He famously declared that the natives in the Americas were human beings and they should not be robbed of their freedom or possessions, which the Spanish crown would force him to retract, but Paul still authorized the purchase and ownership of Muslim slaves in the Papal States. Julius III wasn't very proactive and preferred to spend his time in his luxurious palace. He helped the English Queen Mary I temporarily restore Catholicism in England, reversing her father King Henry VIII's actions, but Protestantism would be reinstated by her successor Elizabeth I. His and the church's reputation was greatly harmed by his close relationship with his teenage adoptive nephew, who he made a powerful cardinal. This scandal drew widespread speculation about the nature of their relationship. Marcellus II worked to keep the peace between France and Spain and was against nepotism, refusing to elevate his nephews for power or wealth. Due to the stress of the papacy, he fell ill and died of a stroke after just 22 days as Pope, the sixth shortest. Paul IV very much disliked the Spanish Habsburgs and caused Spain to invade the Papal States, forcing Paul to negotiate peace. He also elected his nephew as a cardinal, a practice becoming very common at the time as popes often didn't have their own children. They would elevate their nephews as cardinals, but this was widely condemned and is actually where the word nepotism comes from. He was known for his harsh treatment of Protestants and Spanish Jewish converts, having 25 of them burned at the stake. He confined Jews in Rome to a sealed-off neighborhood, creating the first Roman ghetto, forcing them to wear yellow hats and encouraged Christians to treat them as second-class citizens. He also cut off the pensions of Michelangelo and ordered him to paint clothes on the nude figures in the Sistine Chapel, which Michelangelo ignored. Paul even talked about wanting to whitewash the whole ceiling to remove the painting as he considered it indecent. The people of Rome disliked him so much that on his death, they rioted and put a yellow hat on his statue before decapitating it and throwing it into the Tiber River. Pius IV was the third pope from a branch of the Medici family. He pardoned those who rioted at the death of his predecessor Paul and arrested Paul's corrupt and depraved cardinal nephews who were strangled and beheaded. He presided over the end of the Council of Trent to reform the Catholic Church, but he still made 3 of his own nephews cardinals. After the death of Michelangelo, he carried out the wishes of his predecessor Paul by having one of Michelangelo's friends cover up most of the nudity with loincloths, some of which would be removed again after the 1990s. Pius V was known for further reforming the church and being firmly against nepotism. As a cardinal, he criticized the previous pope to his face for trying to make a 13-year-old family member a cardinal. He excommunicated the English Queen Elizabeth I for restoring Protestantism and persecuting English Catholics. He formed the Holy League, which was a military alliance of Catholic nations that defeated the Ottoman Empire's advances into Eastern Europe despite being outnumbered, which was seen as a great victory. He also personally bought grain which he would distribute to the poor and improved Rome's water and sewage systems. Gregory XIII is best known for commissioning the Gregorian calendar named after him that's universally used today. This fixed the leap year system and is the most accurate calendar ever made. This replaced the Julian calendar, which was proposed by Julius Caesar and used since 45 BC. To make this work, Gregory decreed that the 5th of October would skip 10 days to the 15th of October, which angered landlords that lost a week and a half's rent. The new calendar would be gradually adopted around the world over hundreds of years. He tried to encourage the King of Spain to overthrow the Queen of England and sent a ship of soldiers to aid the Catholics against the Protestants in Ireland, and then the English executed everyone on board, including the women and children. Sixtus V repaired church finances, improved the infrastructure and air quality of Rome, and rooted out corruption and lawlessness. Executing many nuns and clergy that broke their vows, he renewed excommunications of the English Queen and made plans for the Spanish to invade England, which never materialized. He also fiercely condemned all forms of contraception or abortion and wanted to introduce the death penalty for adultery, but didn't succeed. Also during this time, Spain and Portugal unified under the Iberian Union under King Philip II. Urban VII was known for his charity, humility, and fierce opposition to nepotism. He also established the world's first global smoking ban in or around any church. He was pope for just 13 days, the shortest in history, and died of malaria before being officially consecrated. Gregory XIV outlawed betting on papal or cardinal elections and excommunicated the French King Henry IV for being a Protestant. He raised an army for the invasion of France, siding with the Spanish who helped him to become pope. He also commanded that the slaves in the Philippines be set free by the Europeans who were enslaving them, and died after less than a year as pope. Innocent IX supported the Catholic League alliance of Spain, papal forces, and the Jesuits against France in the French Wars of Religion to combat Protestantism. He died after just 2 months as pope. Clement VIII saw the French King Henry IV convert to Catholicism, ending the French Wars of Religion, and established an alliance of Christian nations to oppose the Ottoman Empire in what's called the Long Turkish War. He implemented even stricter measures on the Jews in the Papal States and is believed to have popularized drinking coffee, being one of the first popes to drink it, which had recently been brought from the Americas. Leo XI was the last pope from the Medici family, being elected with the help of the French and Italian cardinals against the wishes of the Spanish. He became pope at age 69, and due to the cold temperatures during his coronation ceremony, he became ill and died after just 27 days as pope, the 9th shortest reign. Paul V supported the discoveries of the legendary astronomer and physicist Galileo, who proposed the controversial theory that the Earth revolved around the Sun, built off the theories of Copernicus, who was previously supported by a pope. He clashed with Venice over church views, which would have to be mediated by France and Spain, and had strained relations with the Catholics in England. There were roughly 500 million Christians at the time, with it having been spread to the Americas, Africa, and Asia. He also financed the completion of the current St. Peter's Basilica. Gregory XV supported the Holy Roman Emperor and Catholic League against the Protestants and the Polish-Lithuanian king against the Ottomans. He also founded a congregation to oversee the spread of Catholicism and missionaries around the world, and issued the last papal ordinance against witchcraft. Urban VIII expanded papal territory through many wars while incurring massive debts that made him very unpopular and weakened the next few popes' political and military influence in Europe. He also forbid slavery in South America, and in 1640 Portugal regained independence from Spain, and the two countries would be at war for the next 18 years. He used nepotism on a large scale to empower his family members, and his long reign oversaw the 30 Years' War, one of the most destructive wars in European history. He was also involved in the church's famous trial of Galileo for proving that Earth revolved around the sun, leading to his conviction and house arrest. Innocent X clashed with the powerful family of his predecessor over their financial abuses, causing them to flee to France. He tried to aid the Irish in creating an independent Catholic state during the British Civil Wars, which was put down by Oliver Cromwell. Alexander VII was chosen as the next pope, as it was believed he would be against nepotism, but a year into his reign he made his nephew cardinal, and his administration was mostly made of his family members. He made significant contributions to architecture and Rome's urban planning, and also favoured Spain in its war against Portugal. Clement IX was a prominent writer of letters, poetry, and dramas. He negotiated peace after the War of Devolution between France and Spain over the Spanish Netherlands, and the Restoration War between Spain and Portugal ended with Portugal keeping their independence. He refused to have his name placed on buildings erected during his reign, and was well liked in Rome for his humility, charity, and refusal to enrich his family. He tried to strengthen the Venetian defences against the Turkish invasion of Crete, which saw one of the longest sieges in history of 21 years. He's said to have died of a broken heart after learning about the Venetians' defeat. Clement X was said to have been the oldest pope at his election at the age of 79, initially refusing the position, stating he was too old to bear such a burden, but later accepting. He helped to establish better relations between the Christian nations and saw a brief dispute with cardinals and ambassadors after his cardinal nephew introduced a new tax that didn't exempt them. Innocent XI lowered taxes and repaired the papal finances under his frugal leadership. He condemned nepotism in the church and was remarked for his standards and noble behavior. He assembled the Holy League to free Austria and Hungary from the Ottoman Turks and is known in Hungary as the Saviour of Hungary. He had a difficult relationship with France, whose ambassador marched on Rome, and King Louis XIV temporarily confiscated Avignon from the papal territory. He advocated for better treatment of Jews, compelling Venice to release Jewish prisoners, but still forbid Roman Jews from moneylending, which he believed was destroying people's livelihoods. Alexander VIII undid a lot of the policies of his predecessor, and after a series of good popes, his short reign devolved into nepotism, which he used to enrich and empower his family, once again destroying the papal finances his predecessors had worked hard to improve. He was elected with the help of the French King Louis XIV, who returned Avignon to the papal territories. Innocent XII took a firm stance against nepotism, issuing a decree that strictly forbid it and the revenue or land being given to a pope's relatives. This mostly eradicated the rampant nepotism within the church from here onwards. Clement XI was elected unanimously and saw the War for the Spanish Succession break out, where the French Bourbons and the Austrian Habsburgs battled for the Spanish crown. He was also a patron of the arts, sciences, and archaeology, contributing to the Vatican Library and authorizing rediscoveries of many ancient Christian writings. Innocent XIII was the last pope to have taken this name. His short reign wasn't massively eventful, but it was stable and prosperous. He oversaw the Chinese rites controversy, which began under his predecessor and was a dispute over whether Chinese worship was compatible with Christianity. He also assisted Malta in dealing with the Barbary pirates and supported an English Catholic prince who attempted to claim the throne. Benedict XIII was the fifth and final pope from the Orsini family. He chose to live a simple life and worked to stop the extravagant lifestyles of priests and cardinals. He also abolished the lottery in Rome and the Papal States and built many hospitals. His lack of political knowledge led to a cardinal who was previously his secretary enriching himself, draining the papal finances and greatly damaging the church. He also lifted the worldwide smoking ban in and around churches. Clement XII became the next pope at the age of 78 and would be the oldest pope elected from here onwards. He immediately restored the papal finances by bringing back the lottery, demanding restitutions from those who had taken advantage of his predecessor, and fining and imprisoning the cardinal who was the main culprit. With these funds, he built roads, ports, docks, museums, and a library in Rome. Benedict XIV was one of the most loved and scholarly popes who promoted science and arts, lifting the ban on Galileo's works and reforming the church teachings. He supported agriculture and free trade within the Papal States and settled disputes with the kingdoms of Italy, Spain, and Austria. He worked to improve finances by reducing the papal army and budget and compelled the Portuguese king to stop slavery in its colony of Brazil, which was ignored. And in 1 month, he gave out 43,000 meals to the poor. He was known as a noble, kind pope of great character without any nepotism, vanity, or corruption, dying at age 83 after a long, successful reign. Clement XIII was a defender of the controversial Jesuits, a Catholic order that grew powerful and were loyal to the Pope. Being against indigenous American slavery and colonialism, they became an obstacle to the European monarchies who wanted the Pope to suppress them. He also had the nude statues in the Vatican covered with fig leaves. Clement XIV saw the problem of the Jesuits continue as Spain, Portugal, and France threatened to break away from the Catholic Church, which effectively forced the Pope to reconcile their demands and suppress the Jesuits. He protected the Jews against various persecutions that were happening in Europe, and the 14-year-old legendary musician Mozart, being Catholic, was invited to play for the Pope, who was so impressed by his abilities he made Mozart a knight. Pius VI had the fourth longest reign as a pope after a long era of relative peace, but would see chaos return. The French Revolution broke out, and France separated from the Catholic Church and seized the papal territory of Avignon in France, ending 450 years of it belonging to the Pope. French troops led by the general Napoleon invaded Italy, defeating the papal troops, and the French later marched to Rome. After refusing to renounce his power, the Pope was taken as prisoner to France, where he died shortly after arriving. He had the longest reign of any Pope at the time since Peter. Pius VII cautiously signed a treaty with Napoleon, who now ruled France, where he recognized Napoleon's authority and France would allow Catholicism again, but not to be its official religion, allowing others like Protestantism. Napoleon then invited the Pope to his coronation as emperor, where he placed a replica of Charlemagne's crown on his own head instead of having the Pope place it to show he was above the Pope. However, Napoleon once again invaded and annexed the Papal States, and the Pope was again taken prisoner to France for years. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, Pius was released and returned to Italy, where he was greeted as a hero and lived the rest of his papacy in peace. He saw Catholicism grow significantly due to the recently formed United States, and restored the Jesuits to their previous power. He was also the first pope to fiercely condemn the slave trade of Africans, noting its unique cruelty. He urged Spain to end the practice and then begged Portugal to stop what he called an unholy and abominable sin. Despite these progressive viewpoints, he restored the Roman Jewish ghettos which Napoleon had abolished. Jews were once again sealed in the worst part of the city with little rights or freedom. Leo XII suffered pain and poor health throughout his papacy. He was very conservative and became unpopular for his strict laws, such as threatening to excommunicate dressmakers that weren't to his modest standards. He also forbid Jews in Rome from owning property, enforced segregation, and forced them to wear marks of identification, which caused many Jews to leave Rome. Despite his frugal measures, he failed to improve the Papal State's finances. Pius VIII saw the July Revolution in France and the Catholic emancipation in the UK, which granted more acceptance of Catholicism. He also reluctantly allowed marriages between Catholics and Protestants as long as the children were raised Catholic. Spending most of his reign in poor health, he died at age 69 and had the shortest papacy in the 19th century. Gregory XVI saw liberal revolutions rapidly spreading throughout Europe because of Napoleon. He was against modernizing reforms to the Papal States, such as the recent innovations of gas lighting and railways, believing they would empower the political elites. The Pope's influence in France was heavily reduced because of the overthrown royals, and Gregory wrote to denounce the slave trade. All opposition to teaching the earth revolved around the sun was finally dropped by the church. Pius IX was the first pope to be photographed and had an extremely long reign, but would see the greatest downfall in the history of popes. Europe had widespread nationalist revolutions against monarchies, and Italy was attempting to unify as one country, threatening the Papal States. Pius refused to go to war with Austria, who had annexed North Italy, and Rome turned against him. The Prime Minister of the Papal States then was assassinated, and the Pope's personal Swiss Guard was disarmed and he had to flee Rome. The Roman Republic was established as a new country, abolishing the Pope's power. He then called on the French under Napoleon III, who invaded Rome, destroyed the Roman Republic, and restored Pius, who moved his residence to the Vatican, where they would remain to this day. However, Italian forces of 60,000 later defeated the papal army of 10,000 and the Pope surrendered. Italy was for the first time unified as one Kingdom of Italy, with Rome as its capital and Victor Emmanuel II as the new king. After 1,100 years, the Papal States were no more, and Pope Pius was confined to the Vatican, where he denounced and refused to recognize the new Italian kingdom, famously calling himself a prisoner in the Vatican, where he and the next 3 popes would refuse to leave it. He died at age 85 and had the longest reign of any pope besides Peter. Leo VIII was the first pope to be filmed on a video camera and is believed to have been the earliest born person ever to appear on film. He marked the modern age of popes, where they would now only have spiritual power over the Catholic Church. Though still massively respected and influential, they were no longer political leaders without the Papal States. Leo is known as the Pope of the Workers, advocating for working class rights, fair wages, safe working conditions, rights to own property, trade unions, free enterprise, and opposing communism, which was growing in Europe. He brought stability back to the church and was considered a great diplomat, improving relations with France, Britain, Germany, and Russia, among others. He died at age 93, the oldest verified pope in history, who had the 4th longest reign of any pope. Pius X introduced many reforms to church doctrine. After one of the deadliest earthquakes in European history killed 80,000 in southern Italy, he took in refugees to the Vatican long before the Italian government acted. He met with the Zionist founder Theodor Herzl and declined to support the foundation of an Israeli state because of the Jewish refusal to acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah. He negotiated a deal with the United States for them to purchase the Catholic land in the US's recently acquired Philippines territory for $7 million. He also declared tango dancing as immoral and forbidden to Catholics. Like his predecessor, he still refused to leave the Vatican in protest to the new Kingdom of Italy, which he didn't recognize, and saw relations with France and some other nations worsen when they met with the King of Italy. He was described as humble, reducing the lavishness of ceremonies, and rejected nepotism, with his close relatives choosing to live in poverty near Rome. He died at age 79 and was loved among the people. Around this time, there were roughly 1 billion Christians. Benedict XV was the Pope during World War I and would focus most of his attention towards the situation. He declared the church's neutrality, though it said he favored the French against the mostly Protestant Germans. He attempted to mediate peace many times, with both sides rejecting his efforts. He turned his attention towards rescuing civilians, prisoners of war, and exchanging wounded soldiers. His actions directly saved many tens of thousands, and he delivered food to struggling populations. He also helped the persecuted Catholics in the new Soviet Russia and victims of the famine under their revolution. When the Great War ended, he repaired relations with France and the Vatican and saw relations improve with Italy, though like his predecessors, he still refused to leave the Vatican or recognize the Kingdom of Italy. He supported the Balfour Declaration and was for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, saying the Jews returning to Palestine was the will of God. Benedict was the first pope to meet a United States president, being Woodrow Wilson. He believed the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh on the Germans and would soon lead to another war. Pius XI would see the build-up of the Second World War. Benito Mussolini had seized control of Italy and was keen to make peace with the Pope to legitimize his regime. They came to an agreement where the Vatican City would become an independent country within Rome, with the Pope as sovereign over the smallest country in the world. In exchange, the Pope would abandon claims to the former territories of the Papal States and recognize the Kingdom of Italy, though it wasn't obliged to support Mussolini's regime. The Vatican also received the equivalent of $100 million for the lost church property, which Pius invested into the US stock market and real estate, which significantly improved the church finances. Pius was the first pope in 60 years to finally leave the Vatican. He fiercely condemned the Nazi takeover of Germany and treatment of the Jews, and refused to comply with Mussolini when he allied with the Germans and implemented their policies in Italy. Hitler sent a telegram to the Pope congratulating his coronation anniversary, to which Pius responded with harsh criticisms of the German regime. While his foreign secretary fearfully didn't want to relay the response, the Pope insisted it be sent. Pius strongly denounced their race theories and persecutions at every opportunity, saying it's incompatible with Christian teachings and there is only one human race, and supported Catholic missionaries in the United States working to help disadvantaged Native and African Americans. He promoted gender roles, writing that society should allow fathers to make high enough wages so that mothers don't need to work, which he called intolerable abuse. He established the Vatican Radio and was the first pope to broadcast using this new technology, which he loved. Pius died at age 81 after suffering 2 heart attacks, with some of his last audible words said to have been "Peace, peace." Pius XII is by far the most debated pope in history due to his actions or lack of actions during World War II. Before becoming pope, he was the Vatican's representative in Germany. He later returned to Rome, becoming the Vatican's Secretary of State, where he negotiated a treaty with Germany to grant rights and freedoms to the Catholic Church in Germany, which they would repeatedly violate in their religious persecutions. Pius was elected pope because of his experience in dealing with Germany. With the outbreak of World War II, the Vatican declared its neutrality, and he turned the Vatican into a center of aid for prisoners of war, refugees, and also processed 10 million information requests for helping missing people locate their families. He had sympathy for the German people, but not its leadership. He personally sided with the Allies, and especially the United States, where the Vatican's wealth was invested. After the German-Soviet invasion of Poland, he denounced anti-Semitism, war, and totalitarianism, preaching equality. Pius aided the Allies with vital intelligence which angered Mussolini, and when the German foreign minister asked the Pope why he was siding with the Allies, Pius replied with a list of their atrocities being carried out. He unsuccessfully tried to dissuade Mussolini from siding with Germany, and he used the radio at Christmas to broadcast a message further condemning the atrocities, and the Germans then accused the Pope of being a mouthpiece for the Jews. When the Germans occupied Italy and Rome, they planned to storm the Vatican and kidnap Pius, but this never materialized. Pius employed many Jewish scholars expelled by Mussolini and hid 5,000 Roman Jews in the Vatican and his summer home, saving them from deportation camps. Hitler's personal biographer said the Pope saved more Jewish lives than any other institution, and the Pope privately called Adolf an untrustworthy scoundrel and fundamentally wicked person, regarding him as Lucifer. But Pius was still criticized even by the Allies for not doing enough, and remaining officially neutral and not calling out the German leadership by name. Many defend his actions, considering the Vatican was defenseless inside Italy under Mussolini and also occupied by the Germans, saying that no amount of words from the Pope could have stopped them. Pius stated that the war against communism was a holy war and excommunicated members of the Italian Communist Party. Much of the Pope's earliest criticisms have been found to originate from communist sources who sought to discredit the Pope and Western Catholicism, as the Pope was fiercely against communism. In 2020, Pope Francis unsealed millions of Vatican documents of Pius, allowing scholars to analyze his true role in the war. So far, it's been confirmed that Pius did personally save at least 15,000 Jews from extermination, and sent a report about the atrocities to the American government, who didn't believe him. However, it's also been uncovered that the Pope, soon after he was elected, had secret negotiations with Hitler to protect the church in Germany, though an agreement was never actually made. Pius was also involved in a scandal of hiding Jewish orphans from their surviving family in an attempt to keep them Catholic after their secret baptism was done against the wishes of their family. In other areas, Pius accepted that evolution explains the origins of humanity, but maintained that the soul was created by God. After World War II, Italy voted to abolish its royal family because of its complicity with fascism and Germany. While Pius disliked the king for these same reasons, he privately said to his envoy that he would have preferred Italy remain a monarchy, and feared that without it, Italy may become more secular or anti-Catholic, as the papacy is very similar to a monarchy. Pius remains a debated figure, with his biggest criticisms being his lack of actions and lack of aid towards the persecutions in World War II. But some also debate that he was wrongly vilified and celebrate his efforts, including many Jews such as Einstein and multiple Israeli prime ministers who applaud him as a savior. John XXIII made significant efforts as a bishop in Hungary to save Jews during World War II, and was sympathetic towards Jewish immigration to Palestine, which he saw as a humanitarian issue, not a biblical one. During a conclave to elect the next pope, something very unusual happened. White smoke appeared from the chimney, which means the next pope has been chosen, but this was then followed by black smoke, meaning they were undecided, and the conclave continued until John XXIII was elected. Some believe that a different pope may have been selected and was either forced to step down or had chosen to, or perhaps the chemicals used to make the smoke had malfunctioned, but this remains a debated topic. When John became pope, he worked to improve relations with the Vatican and Russian Orthodox Church. He created the first ever cardinals from Africa, Japan, and the Philippines, and he demonstrated great respect for the Jewish people, but the Vatican still did not recognize Israel as a state and wouldn't until 1993. He was described as humble, and on one occasion was gifted a very expensive papal crown or tiara, and requested that half of the jewels be removed and sold to give the money to the poor. He tried to mediate between US President JFK and the Soviet leader Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis, with both leaders applauding the Pope for his peaceful efforts. For this, John was the first Pope to be made Time magazine's Man of the Year. He died at age 81 of stomach cancer and was later made a saint. However, in 2003, the Guardian newspaper revealed a confidential 69-page document instructing bishops around the world to cover up cases of abuse by clergy or run the risk of being excommunicated. This document had the seal of John XXIII, and these abuse scandals would continue to stain the Catholic Church's reputation. Paul VI became the next pope as a popular candidate and was close friends with his two predecessors. He got rid of most of the pageantry and extravagance of the pope's ceremonies and sold his crown, giving the money to charity. He improved relations with the Eastern Orthodox and Protestant churches, and he completed the Second Vatican Council started by his predecessor, which is described as bringing the most significant reforms and improvements to the church in 400 years. He was the first pope to travel on an aeroplane and visited every continent besides Antarctica, being named as the Pilgrim Pope, with there being roughly 1.5 billion Christians worldwide. In New York, he addressed the United Nations to plead for peace in Vietnam, and in the Philippines, a man tried to attack him with a knife before being detained. He was twice denied entry by the communist government of Poland. He sent one of the messages of goodwill from world leaders to the Apollo 11 astronauts when they first landed on the moon. This coin-sized disc with the engraved messages remains there today. He died at age 80 after suffering a heart attack and was later made a saint. John Paul I, as a cardinal, sold a valuable gold cross and chain which once belonged to the previous Pope Pius XII and used the money to help disabled children. He also urged priests to sell their valuables and do the same to live humbly. As Pope, he was the first to choose two papal names, honouring both of his predecessors. He took more steps to make the papacy more humble, initially refusing the papal throne, and was the first pope to refuse to be crowned, changing the ceremony from a coronation to an inauguration and permanently getting rid of the papal tiara or crowns which had been worn for over 1,000 years. After just 33 days as Pope at age 65, he was found dead in his bedroom while reading with his lamp still on. It's believed he suffered a heart attack as he complained from severe chest pains the night before. John Paul II was elected at age 58 and took the name of his predecessor. He was the first Polish Pope and first non-Italian Pope in 450 years since Adrian, the only Dutch Pope. He is the most travelled Pope in history, visiting 129 countries, expanding the Catholic Church's influence in Africa and Latin America, seeing the amount of Christians worldwide reach 2 billion and 1 billion Catholics. He drew some of the largest crowds ever, with one in the Philippines being over 6 million. He was the first Pope to visit both the White House meeting President Jimmy Carter and the United Kingdom meeting Queen Elizabeth II. He was the first Pope to pray at the Jewish Western Wall in Jerusalem as well as synagogues, and to pray in an Islamic mosque where he controversially kissed a Quran. He visited many African countries but refused to visit South Africa, condemning the apartheid government. He criticized the US-led invasion of Iraq as a defeat for humanity, which got him nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. He was the first pope to denounce the mafia in southern Italy, after which the mafia bombed 2 historical churches in Rome. He directly influenced the removal of dictatorships in Chile, Haiti, and Paraguay, and is credited for being instrumental in the collapse of communism in Europe. US President Ronald Reagan opened diplomatic relations with the Vatican for the first time in 100 years, and they had a close relationship opposing communism. The Pope also met with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, who said the collapse of the Iron Curtain would have been impossible without John Paul II. Poland's communist government tried to discredit John Paul by falsely claiming he fathered an illegitimate child, and they also drugged a woman, trying to make her claim that she had an intimate relationship with the Pope, but these plots were exposed. He was the first Pope in 1,000 years to visit the Eastern Orthodox churches in Romania, Ukraine, and Greece, attempting to heal the Great Schism, and was also the first Pope to visit a Lutheran Protestant church. He significantly improved relations with Judaism as he grew up in Poland with Jews and saved many from the Germans during World War II, which the Israeli government honored him for, and the Vatican recognized the State of Israel during his time. He elevated over 1,800 people to the titles of Blessed and Saint, more than the last 500 years of popes combined. In 1981, he was shot twice in Vatican City, where he lost 3/4 of his blood, but survived. The Turkish gunman was part of a militant fascist group and was restrained by a nun until he was imprisoned for life in Italy, where the Pope visited and forgave him. After serving 19 years, he was released at the request of the Pope and then deported to Turkey, where he served another 10 years for previous crimes there. John Paul's secretary revealed that the Pope privately believed the Soviet Union was behind the attempt, and many independent investigations also concluded the same. Exactly a year after the first attempt, he was attacked with a bayonet by a Spanish Catholic traditionalist priest, which gave him a minor injury. The attacker said his motives were in opposition to the church reforms made by the Second Vatican Council. He only served 3 of a 6-year sentence. In addition, there was another plot against him, which was the first in a 3-stage plan by an Islamist group under Al-Qaeda, who planned to dress as priests and detonate a bomb as John Paul passed a crowd in the Philippines. The attempt was foiled just 6 days before it would have happened, when a chemical fire in the attacker's apartment alerted police, where they were arrested and confessed to the plot. The Pope was only the first stage in the plan. The next 2 stages were to blow up 11 planes and then crash another into the CIA headquarters. John Paul also issued apologies for the church's condemnation of Galileo, Catholic involvement in the Atlantic slave trade and inquisitions, injustices against women, and inactivity over Jewish persecutions during World War II. However, his reputation was called into serious question when the extent of child abuse by members of the church worldwide became a massive scandal during his papacy. He and the Vatican have been widely criticized for their secrecy and lack of transparency in handling multiple allegations. They only carried out internal investigations, which often led to inconclusive results and the abusers not being properly punished or moved around. It was only in 2002 when John Paul finally spoke out against the scandal and implemented reforms requiring background checks, and that the church would report allegations to the police to investigate, so that they could face criminal trials instead of the internal church trials, which would only result in them being kicked out of the church. After 26 years, the third longest reign of a pope, he died at age 84, suffering many health problems. His funeral was the largest ever gathering of world leaders at the time, with 4 kings, 5 queens, 80 presidents and prime ministers, and leaders of Protestant, Orthodox, Jewish, Islamic, and Buddhist faiths in attendance. He's the most recent pope to become a saint, and many also give him the title of John Paul the Great. Benedict XVI wanted to retire as a cardinal due to his health and submitted 3 resignations, but stayed on at the request of Pope John Paul II. He was elected pope at age 78, having already been an influential figure in the Vatican for decades, and took his name in honor of Benedict XV, who reigned during World War I. He quickly drew criticism from Muslims when he gave a speech quoting a 14th century text saying that the Islamic prophet Muhammad brought things evil and inhumane and spread his faith by the sword, after which he apologized and met with many Muslim leaders. He also traveled extensively, but was met with protests in Turkey, which is majority Muslim, and he had significant security measures. He visited the United States, meeting with President George Bush, and addressed the United Nations and met with victims of abuse by priests. In Australia, he also made an apology for abuse committed by clergy there. He supported the peaceful use of nuclear energy and encouraged diplomacy to settle the dispute over North Korea's nuclear weapons program. During a Christmas Eve Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, a woman jumped the barrier, grabbing Benedict's robes and pulling him to the ground. The 82-year-old Pope was uninjured and continued the service and later forgave the woman, although another cardinal also fell and broke his hip. He wrote 66 books, recorded a music album, and was the first Pope to make a Twitter account. Before becoming Pope, he was a leading figure in investigating abuse allegations around the world and removing what he called filth from the church, creating new canon laws for offences, fast-tracking the dismissal of abusers, reporting them to the police, and safeguarding the youth. He was described as being strict and courageous in handling very difficult cases, making efforts not to cover anything up, which sometimes didn't please the Vatican. He even investigated a powerful Austrian cardinal who was friends with the previous Pope John Paul II and had him removed. Though he was strongly criticized for not taking firm enough action against 4 cases in Germany while he was a cardinal, and not taking seriously the allegations against other priests that were just moved around and continued their abuse. In 2013, he surprisingly announced that he would retire the papacy due to his poor health at age nearly 86. Being the second only pope in history to resign voluntarily without external pressure. He spent the rest of his life with the title Pope Emeritus, meaning a retired pope, where he studied, wrote, and spent time with the next Pope Francis. He died in 2022 at age 95 as the oldest verified pope to have ever lived, though as he retired at age 85, he wasn't the oldest reigning pope. Francis is from Argentina, being the first pope from the Americas and the Southern Hemisphere, and his parents were of Italian origin. He was made a cardinal by Pope John Paul II, and upon his death was said to have been the second most popular candidate to Pope Benedict. Though he wanted to retire many times, Francis became the next pope at age 76 as a very popular candidate. He chose his never-before-used name in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. He's also the first Jesuit pope, the at-times controversial Catholic group that's very popular in South America and had significant power and influence and clashed with the European countries. He chose to wear the same iron cross that he had always worn instead of the lavish gold one usually worn by popes. He abolished many of the bonuses paid to Vatican staff, donating the millions saved to charity. He also began to investigate and reform the Vatican Bank, which had allegations of corruption and money laundering, making it more transparent, replacing most of its overseers and promising to close the bank if reforms proved too difficult. Francis is widely considered the most liberal and progressive pope in history, which has caused divides, with some labeling him as a heretic that goes against tradition, considering Benedict was very conservative, but others consider Francis a welcome reformer to an outdated church. He's fiercely against the death penalty, advocating for its worldwide abolition, saying it's an attack on dignity that only fuels the thirst for vengeance. He appointed women to many positions previously only held by men. He was criticized early in his papacy for being too lenient on members of the church being accused of abuse, which he apologized for, and later took stronger efforts to punish abusers, releasing some reports that even faulted the two previous popes for mishandling cases. He's often expressed concern for climate change and the controlling of resources for greed and profit, stating that ecocide is a sin. He also advocates for universal basic income and higher taxes on billionaires. He's been more accommodating of any pope of the LGBT community, famously stating, "Who am I to judge?" and denouncing its criminalization. While still maintaining that marriage is between man and woman, he supports the legality of civil unions, allowing the blessing of individuals but not as a joint marriage. He's a strong supporter of immigrants and refugees, as his father fled Italy during Mussolini's regime. Francis approved a unique and controversial agreement where the Vatican must consult with the Chinese government to approve bishops in China in return for China recognizing the Pope as the head of the Catholic Church. However, their relationship is tense, as the Vatican is one of only 12 countries that recognize Taiwan, and China doesn't recognize the Vatican City as a state. China has repeatedly violated the agreement, installing bishops without Vatican approval, but Francis insists that uneasy dialogue is better than no dialogue at all. Francis also named China's Uyghur population as one of the world's most persecuted people. He also visited Cuba, meeting with Raul Castro, and was a key figure in restoring full diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States under President Obama. He also visited Israel and Palestinian territories, meeting with both leaders, and later invited the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to the Vatican, which recognized the state of Palestine. He's issued statements calling for peace, ceasefires, and a two-state solution, while denouncing actions on both sides. He's repeatedly called for peace between Russia and Ukraine, sending high-ranking cardinals to attempt peace talks but without any success, and has been criticized for not specifically condemning Russia. In 2013, 14, and 15, Forbes ranked Francis as the fourth most powerful person in the world. He was the first pope to make an Instagram account, breaking the record after gaining 1 million followers in 12 hours. Francis was said to be healthy when he was elected, though he is prone to lung problems due to having part of a lung removed when he was 21. At age 88, he was in a critical condition in February 2025, suffering severe bronchitis which led to further complications, as well as having early kidney failure. After 5 weeks in hospital, his condition stabilized and he returned to the Vatican. Francis has stated that he hasn't considered resigning but would do so if his health made it impossible to run the church, which indicates he is open to following the steps of his predecessor Benedict in doing the unheard of practice of stepping down in poor health, and this could become a new trend for the modern papacy.